Okay, so I got a question here. I'm going to do my best to answer it. From Jason Wong, he writes, "What is the dynamic state in the prenatal and postnatal configuration? What determines the movement of towards the opposite of the octagon, or forward or even backward cyclical movement?" Okay, so this is a great set of issues, and I'm trying to be as thorough as possible in sticking with the basic idea of the theory. And the basic idea of the theory is built on the traditionally associated terms, and that also includes the fact that these are arrangements that are set to the points of a compass. So, for example, here you have this implied daily motion because of the directional points. Now, so that's one obvious movement. The ancients used natural metaphor when they were poetically describing their cosmology, their understanding of existence. And since a day doesn't move backward, I really don't know that there is a backwards movement involved. I don't know that a backwards movement is impossible, but I don't see anything to indicate that that's what they had in mind, at least. But there are other movements that I believe they had in mind, and part of that is something that I haven't talked about much, but it has to do with this concept of the family. So there is a four-generation, you could say, family conception here. And here in the prenatal, you can see that you have father, mother, and then the first son is thunder, first daughter is wind, second son is water, second daughter is fire, and then the daughter, a little inversion there, right? The third daughter is lake, and the third son is mountain. So that's fascinating right there. First of all, it's interesting to note that the male, with the exception of the father, has a single yang line, right? So first son, second son, third son, and daughter has a single yin, even though the mother is three. So somehow the fundamental female is 3 yin, fundamental male is 3 yang, but the offspring only have 1. It's interesting. I'm just pointing this out. I'll make another video about the family relations later. There's some interesting stuff in here. But this is just to say that there's another type of order, because obviously the first generation, second generation, third generation, right? That implies, it implies the annual, the daily cycle as well. It's heading in this direction. But what it really implies is that the movement is happening simultaneously from both of the poles. So it's not just one thing going around, it's 2 things going around. And this corresponds with something I'm working on right now, which is I'm trying to correlate this system to the kind of thing that Ken Wheeler talks about. I don't know if you're familiar with Ken Wheeler. Look him up, Theoria Aphosis on YouTube. He's got thousands of videos about electromagnetic phenomena, metaphysics, and camera equipment. He's a super interesting guy. He's got kind of an abrasive style, but if you can get beyond that, his content is amazing. So I'm trying to figure out, and one of the things that he talks about is the dielectric magnetic field. And he says that nature does not have lines like we think of them. It doesn't have a single line. It has a curved linear lines that emanate from the same point in opposite directions. So there's a basic oppositional thing happening, which is also happening here in the trigram, and there's also a two lines, in essence, coming out of the one. So that's something that I think is worth thinking about, that the idea of it going around and around, it's almost as if what we're talking about is the sun goes around the earth, but it doesn't. The significance is that there's darkness on the other side. So we have to remember that while we may be over here in the light, that there is on the other side this darkness occurring. Right? Okay, so that was a long-winded way of saying that while it seems that the main thing that the ancients were talking about was a daily cycle, east, south, west, north, around and around she goes, there are other things that we can start to think about in terms of movements, patterns and movements. And part of it is that oppositional relationship, that when we realize we're on one side, we can realize that there is another side. And I think that that's actually extremely important when it comes to getting out of the postnatal. So let's talk about the postnatal for a moment. Why does it go around and around like this, right? So we could say that, this is the mind patterns, the patterns of mind that are based upon desired objects. So we're running after what we want. So this is the ordinary mind pattern that goes around and around. So it's built upon sensation, right? There's a memory, so remember that the future is out there somewhere, so our line out here is the so-called bottom line, and the top line, which is about the past, so this here is mountain. So we awaken with the memory of the sensation, right? We have a sense of what is coming, again, positive or negative, right? We go about our business, kind of the repetitive action to try to achieve the object of desire. It's fundamentally empty, so we seek pleasure, and we then have a moment of realization that sends us back into the abyss. We keep going around and around. You could say that the reason why we go around and around, it's not because the sun is circling the earth, although, maybe there's some truth to that. I think the best way to think of it is the ancient Vedic India. It's associated also with Hinduism, the concept of the Gunas, the material modes of nature. You could say that from a Ken Wheeler point of view, it's due to magnetism. We are drawn to it. So, right, the thing that we desire has a kind of magnetic property to it. We're drawn towards it, right? And Wheeler says that all phenomena is fundamentally dielectric magnetism. And so the thing that extends into space that actually is apparent phenomena is magnetism. And the gunas are broken down into three, interestingly enough, and this is going to make for some interesting thinking here. Let's take a look at the basic model again. So the gunas are rajas, tamas, and sattva. So rajas are desire, the thing that we hope to get. Tamas is ignorance, just simply not knowing. And sattva is the urge for enlightenment. There's three of them. So they describe the thing that gets us involved in the material mode of being, right? So postnatal, a material mode of being, we get involved in it, we go around and around. Why? Well, partially because we're ignorant, right? We don't know any better. That's tamas. Rajas is desire, partially because we want stuff, And so we're into this cycle, and the most interesting one is sattva. So having recognized that we're ignorant, and having recognized, so what would ignorance be? I guess ignorance is sort of after the desired object fails to satisfy, we realize that we're kind of ignorant. Ignorant, I guess, is basically an emptiness, a type of emptiness, but it's not really receptive. That's why it's up here at the top instead of down here at the bottom. So when we realize that we're ignorant, when we realize that we're chasing desires, we want something more. It's the basis of the spiritual impulse. We want to get beyond the cycle of samsara. We want to transcend the karma of our existence. And that's sattva. It's kind of a form of desire, really. We want to get away from desire, which of course is desire. It's just an idealized, which is another type of objectifying, so it's another mental object of relieving ourselves from this cycle, right? So it's fascinating that part of the material mode of nature is the desire to be relieved from the material mode of nature, right? And so we can chase after various things, relieving ourselves of the material mode of nature, and you can see that so-called, I'm going to use air quotes, spiritual practices, many of them just become more object reification and idol worship and kind of celebrity. People worshiping sages, gurus, people who they believe to have attained some kind of spiritual freedom. So where's the spiritual freedom in that? I mean, there's some interesting things and all that stuff, right? But ultimately, it falls into the same type of thing. So here we are, going around and around with the objects in the mind. And what's suggested here is that the basic practice is to dissolve the objects of the mind. And so, well, how do we do that? Well, we do that by recognizing that there are objects in the mind. And then we balance it out with the opposites. And so that's what the prenatal is representing. So how do we get to the prenatal? Well, by doing exactly what I just said. So you just recognize that you're in a cycle of postnatal, ego-oriented, object-oriented drama. You recognize the state of mind that you're in, right? Regardless of what it is. I mean, the simplest one, the most common one perhaps, is when you're in a state of clinging fire, thinking about the desired object. So you recognize it and you balance it with the opposite. There it is, right? Now, of course, when you're in the postnatal, here's the fire position. It's kind of the goal of the whole cycle, right? This is the root here in the north, and the goal is up here in the south. So there's two things that happen when you notice where you are. One is that you notice that this is actually not the goal. This is just, in reality, the rising. And that heaven is really the goal. So that says two things. It says, one, when you think you're in fire, it's two things at once. One is that you think it's a goal, but no, it's not. It's actually a method towards the real goal, which is to transcend and understand the phenomenal existence that we're in, so that you're not being tormented by it all the time, right? The other thing that it's telling us is, and this is something I'm not 100% sure about, but I think there's something to it. When we're in this position here, we think we're in fire, but in reality, we're in heaven. Now, does that make sense? Right? So when we're experiencing sensation, and this is not necessarily a good sensation. The good sensation is associated with lake, because you have this young line here in the future, so you want it to continue. But here, not so much. It's abysmal, right? It's darkness. You don't know what's coming, right? The future you can't hold on to. It keeps changing, right? You're falling into the abyss, right? You're holding to the sensation. But in reality, you don't really have control over anything. You're actually in Earth. You think you're here because you're self-absorbed, right? You believe that the objects in the mind are what's really happening, and that they're indicating heaven or hell, something along those lines. You have a bias, right? But actually, you're here. Now, it's also fascinating to consider that here in the Northeast, we have trigrams that appear to be the same, but they're not. They're actually inversions of each other. Here's the mountain. Here's thunder. So in the postnatal, the mindset that we're usually accustomed to, the first thing before we get up is kind of this reformation of the objects that it's sort of like, I got all this stuff I got to do, right? It's like before you even get up, right? It's the memory of all that stuff that left over from the day before. It's like, work, I gotta go do all this stuff, I have all these responsibilities, everything, the weight of all of history is right there before you even frickin' get up, right? What if what's really going on actually is the sense of future potential? It's an interpretation issue. So the ego-oriented mind feels like everything is happening to me, right? I'm going in this direction. And so it's all personalized, right? Ego temporally conditioned by time. We feel like, fuck, this is happening to me, right? It's my karma, my life, right? It was the me generation when we were young, and so particularly bad case of it in the modern world. Hopefully, the millennials will get it better. We'll see. Here, without that sense of it's happening to me, with a broader understanding of the nature of things, it's just future potential. All that leftover stuff is actually things that could be done in the future. It's not the weight of the past. It's stuff that you could do, right? That's reality. This is a kind of delusion, right? Kind of darkness, a sort of ignorance. It's also interesting to note that here is the darkness, right? Down below in the north, where it's cold, right? Cold and dark. Actually, yin and yang were originally about sides of the mountain, right? The side facing the south that got more light was warmer, and then the side facing the north was colder. So we have that darkness, cold, yin, right? And north. And then we have the brightness, right? Brightness here. South, warm, fire. So this means that this is kind of more visible. This is less visible. So that there's kind of a darkness, unawareness type of aspect to the below the midline here. This is our horizon line because here's the east, right? So to keep going around, just kind of try and do the rest of it quickly. Here's thunder, thinking about the future, right? In reality, is that fire? Well, kinda. I mean, you already thought about the past, right? And it's kind of what stimulated the future. So in reality, it's like tying past and future together to try to bring about some goal. But in this case, you think the goal is fire, right? So you're confused. That's why you get up and do the same thing again. Now notice again, we have exactly the same thing on this eastern side. And this here it's in the southeast. We have, in this case, wind. In this case, joyous. So why is it joyous going up to heaven in the prenatal? Well, because here is a sense of how to achieve heaven. And I'll go back again briefly on the proper use of fire is to put it below the water. This is the Taoist alchemical practice, the gold elixir. And so the fire is very specific. It's put to a specific purpose. It's not burning crazy, running after stuff, trying to get what it wants. No, it has a very specific purpose. What's it doing? It's underneath the cauldron, heating up the water so that it creates the permeating vapor. Now, what does that really mean? What it means is that past and future are dedicated to the practice of following the way. What is following the way? Well, it has to do with emptiness, right? Sacrifice. Sacrifice what? Sacrificing the objects in the mind that you think you're chasing after, that you never get anyway. Right? Because the object in the mind is a representation of something, and a representation is not the thing itself. So, okay. What's the water then? Well, the water is just the state of the actual being, state of pure being. So if you focus on the state of being, you have the potential to neutralize, return to emptiness, right? Because you can't get here. You can't go directly to unification of time. That's something that only occurs when you're empty. The natural, you have to be, because we are children of God. We are humble creatures. We have very little power. We are tiny, tiny, tiny little things on the surface. You know, in terms of the area of the earth, it's just a thin layer of life, the biosphere, right? On the surface, mostly, as far as we know. And we're just a tiny rock, right? We're a few rocks out away from this one star that's got much larger objects a little bit further out, and then billions of other stars. So how we're gonna shoot for heaven? It is a goal in the sense of we're serving the greater good. We're serving God. We are following the Tao to our best of our ability, and we're flawed, and so we recognize that we cannot get there directly. We have to be humble. We have to be receptive. We have to be empty. We remove the thought objects from the mind. So this is to suggest that the contemplation of any one of these trigrams at any point along the way gives us the opportunity to hyperspace jump into the prenatal and to balance it out with the opposite, whatever it may be. So to continue around, we already did fire. Here's earth. When this burns out, right, and we have that disappointed feeling of having sort of gotten what we wanted, it's kind of the moment where you realize you've been a chump. You did all that work and you got the special object that you've been craving for so long. It showed up and you opened it up and it was awesome for a little while, and then it ended up in a drawer somewhere with a bunch of other stuff that you had the same feeling about at one point, but then it didn't quite do the trick. The thing that you really wanted was the wanting of it, and the having of it left you feeling empty. So what is that? Well, that's wind. That's just doing the same thing over and over again. Right? Lake. We think we're having a great time. You're at the party. You're pursuing a enjoyable thing, right? What is it? It's sense indulgence, right? There's no future to it. You think there's a future to it? Let's party like it's 1999. Let's party. Well, I guess actually that song, he was saying that the party was going to be over. But he sure made it sound as if there was... I mean, actually, what's kind of interesting about Prince is a total digression, but to my way of hearing it, his party just sounded more and more forced as time went along. Even in the beginning, it wasn't really a loose, like real enjoyable party situation. It had a kind of hardness to it, this weird kind of urgent thing going on, anxiety, underlying anxiety, which explains why he wrote songs like 1999 and Sign of the Times and stuff like that. He was kind of tuned in a certain way. Anyway, so, and here we go, heaven. We think it's a moment of insight after the party when, it's sort of like you're completely burned out and about to hit bottom, and you get this flash. It's actually mountain, right? It's actually kind of remembering that this cycle sucks. Something like that. Oh, God. I hope that I hope this is making sense. And I hope that the laughter that I'm that is involuntarily coming from me is taken the right way. I mean, this is really difficult and really painful to go through this. But you have to recognize that really it's pretty funny that we keep doing this to ourselves, and that it's so central to the experience of life. I was tempted to say human life. I think life in general, I don't know. But I look the way my dogs behave. They're definitely not in the prenatal. So I don't know if they have the same kind of feeling of, oh God, not this again. Probably as they get older. I think as you get older, it's inevitable, So I'm in my 50s now. If you're a lot younger, you may have no clue what it is I'm talking about. But, go around the cycle a few thousand times. It will wear you out. So, okay, we've discussed the basic daily, going around and around according to the points of the compass. And we've discussed it that it's the realization of consciousness, the expanding consciousness, and self-reflexiveness, reflecting on the state that you're experiencing, that allows you to transport into the prenatal. What else can we say about this? I actually wrote a few things down here because I've realized recently that I forget a lot of things if I don't take some notes. So let's see what it is that I wrote down here. So, natural metaphors, yes. Movements that allow one to escape the ordinary patterns of the postnatal can be explained by the expanding awareness of consciousness, yes. So, moving from one to the other happens on the basis of our own awareness of being. So, minding the mind, using the mind, turning it within, internal practice. I already covered that. Oh yeah, so let's say that somehow or another we were able to fully enter the prenatal without losing it, without falling away from it. Would there be a movement? I don't know. I think maybe not. Prenatal means before born, right? So there is no movement before born. We're talking about a realm of pure potential. And that, in some respects, is represented by the fact that all of the forces are balanced here. Each mind state has opposite to it, and neutralizing it, its opposite. So it's a conjugal realm of potential, where at any moment, any of these could be realized. You could fall into any of them at any moment. There's there's a phrase in one of the Taoist texts that says something like, whether to fly free or to sink back into the ordinary, which is what the prenatal is considered, or the postnatal is considered. So whether to fly free in the prenatal or to sink back into the ordinary is entirely up to the mind. We make the choice, right? And sometimes we might want to do this. We might want to go back in for another round. But we can do it on the basis of a choice, right? Because obviously the phenomenal world exists. And so even if we're able to relieve ourselves of the psychic torment of existing with it, we cannot deny its existence. We at our peril, we diminish or deny the existence of the phenomenal world. And so I think that's where you get the idea of, I believe in Buddhism, it's the bodhisattva who achieves nirvana but decides to come back in and to work for the liberation of all conscious beings. The liberation of all conscious beings means beings recognizing the objects in their mind and being able to neutralize them so as to experience the realm of the prenatal, of pure potential. The Taoists called it the yin convergence. So having achieved the gold elixir and followed the yellow women to the chamber of the gold elixir, you then the yin convergence is returning to the ordinary. So it's kind of the before enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. After enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. So why is that? Well, like we said, you don't want to deny what's real. And there is a tendency, which is part of sattva, part of that material mode of nature. What happens is that when people recognize that they're bound in materialism, they run away from materialism as if it were not real and say, well, only the spirit is real. That's nonsense. That's like saying only light is real. No, light and darkness are together. They cannot be separated. The spirit and the matter are together. They cannot be separated. So that the material mode of nature, the brilliance and the amazing insight of the ancients to include sattva, to include this urge for enlightenment as one of the gunas, as one of the things that holds us in the material mode, is because there is that rejection of the material mode, which is why you become what you hate. So if you recognize the difficulty of the material world, you come to hate it, you become even more of a materialist, and that's divine justice, right? So we're not to... I think perhaps what happens is that you develop a sense of humor when you're in the yin convergence, the postnatal, the ordinary, the day-to-day, the drudgery, the chasing after objects, the disappointments, the ridiculous partying, the after-party realization that's actually just a memory of, oh yeah, that really isn't so great, is it? And then suffering with the sensations and the memory that has you thinking, well, I could do it better next time, and then you get up and you do it again, the same old thing, right? But at any moment, we have that opportunity to come here, right? And you know, there's this another idea that I think is particularly people are really wrapped up in the idea that we got to do something now. Like, as the world gets more and more screwed up and things are just coming apart at the seams, and there's ever more frightening things on the horizon, people feel like we got to do something. We really, really got to do something. And it's like we haven't been able to do anything even when things weren't so screwed up. How are we going to do something now? The Taoists have another saying, which I'm going to paraphrase. I don't remember the exact words, and it's not the exact words anyway because it's just a translation. So they say, you think you can improve the world? No, you can't improve the world. You can only damage it more. So that's before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Why? Well, from a scientific point of view, you could say that even if you have a brilliant idea on how to correct this completely chaotic system, it is completely chaotic. There are so many actors. There are so many moving parts. It is a chaotic world. If you do something, what you're doing is you're creating more chaos, because more activity within a chaotic system is just more chaos. So that's why you can't make it better. You can only damage it more. So the work is internal. The work is in coming to terms with how things are. Coming to terms means being peaceful with it. It means canceling out the thought objects. It is the way it is. That's the whole isness thing, right? Buddhists talk about isness. Like, it just is the way that my little dog is barking right now. And I could yell at her, but I don't feel like yelling at her right now. She's just doing what she does. That's the way she is. I've yelled at her 1,000,000 times, and she has not stopped. I mean, she may stop for a few minutes, but she's not really going to stop. She's going to keep doing that. And I still love her. It's incredibly annoying. I wish she would stop doing it. But there's nothing I can do about it. You know, does it make it worse if I try to stop her? I don't know. I get irritated. You know, if I accept it, it's a little better. But you know what? I am going to yell at her later. I'm going to re-enter the postnatal, and I'm going to go through that cycle. I'm going to get irritated, and she's going to shut up for a couple of minutes, and then she's going to start barking again. It's just the way it is. So I think that just about covers it. I think that's pretty much, well, I think that's more than what I had in mind. So I hope you found that interesting, and I hope it answered the question. If you have any other questions, or if I screwed it up and didn't really say everything that to explain it, please give me a little more detail on what you'd like to hear about. And thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the comment. I really appreciate engagement. It helps me feel that this effort is worth it. So thank you, Jason. And if anyone listening would like to support the work, it's patreon.com/TaijiReality, TaijiReality, like the name of the channel. And until the next time, I will say adios.